Do you love using embossing folders but have some trouble with cracking and want to know which of the tips actually work the best? Hi, I'm Jess from JessCrafts.com and I'm here to help you make the most of your crafty supplies and time. So let's get making. Today I'm going to try out several tips and tricks that I have seen, and I will try to shout out anybody who shared the tip or trick, and I just want to test each one and see which ones work the best so that you don't have to do all the testing. I want to do this for myself anyway, and I thought, why not record it and share my results with you guys? So I have Park Lane cardstock, which is from Joann's, and it is a white core cardstock. So if there's going to be cracking, you are certainly going to notice it on a white core cardstock. And I honestly, unless you are looking for the core to show through, I do recommend solid core cardstock for embossing because this is the exact same conditions, and as you can see, the cracking is much more noticeable here on the white core cardstock. And while there is some cracking here on this solid cardstock, and this is the Recollections 100 pound, these are both 100 pound cardstocks. There's just different companies and the difference in the core, because I thought it would be good to know, and this one would be easy to see the difference. There is a little bit of cracking. It's just much, much harder to notice because it is solid colored cardstock. I have an embossing folder from Spellbinders. This is the embossing folder of the month for December. It has these beautiful hearts, so you can get started on your Valentine cards because it's going to be here before we know it, even though I'll probably release this before Christmas. But it's one of those things where, like, as a crafter, we're always headed to the next holiday. So let's take a look. I wrote down some ideas I want to try. I saw that people recommend misting your cardstock. Yanis Makula and Alexandra from Hedgehog Hollow mentioned this trick, so we'll test that. The Cow Whispers Creative Cards, who I believe is a Stampin' Up! Demonstrator, recommends using vellum. I heard people talk about like rolling the cardstock to break the fibers, and Alexandra from Hedgehog Hollow mentioned that as well. And then several people, including Joanne Maddie here on YouTube, mentioned using computer paper. So we're just going to test each one of these methods, and I've written it down on them so that we don't forget what we are doing with each one. And then I have a piece of the solid core and the white core. Something worth mentioning. I think the cardstock you use, the machine you use, the pressure in the machine you use, all these things will matter. So I don't think it is possible, honestly, to make a definitive video that answers for everyone, for every circumstance, this is the absolute best way to prevent cracking. But I do think that testing them all in a side-by-side situation should give you an idea of which ones have the biggest impact, and then you can go take that advice and experiment with your own machine. Okay, we're going to start with the simplest one first, and that is rolling your cardstock. So I've heard people kind of say just to like gently roll it, to just start loosening up and breaking the fibers a little bit so that when they do get pressed and broken by the embossing folder, they have a little bit of give already. I'm not sure how much this is going to do. I don't have super high hopes about this one, and I do think a lot of people recommend it in conjunction with misting because it has a sort of a similar effect. But I just want to try each one individually, because then I think if I can find out which ones individually have the greatest impact, then I can combine the ones that make the biggest difference and see if combining them leads to even better results. So you can kind of see how I rolled them. I'm trying not to roll them so much that I'm actually putting creases in them because that would defeat the purpose. And then I will put them through my machine. Now I'm using a Gemini Junior, so I will always be using a clear base plate, the embossing folder, and another clear base plate. That is what my machine calls for, and I actually have a list next to my machine that tells me like what my sandwich is for die cutting, embossing with die cuts, etc., because all of that's available on Gemini's or Crafter Companion's website. So it's a great resource to have, and that is what my machine calls for, so that is what I will use each and every time. All right, so let's take a look at our results of rolling the cardstock to break up the fibers. I'm not noticing much improvement at all, if any. So this is the rolled cardstock. This is the plain cardstock, no modification. I don't see that as on the white core, the rolling of the cardstock is doing much of anything, but again, maybe you're supposed to combine it with another technique. And then it is much harder to see, as I mentioned, that there is any cracking on this, but I can see some of the details, and I'm gonna hold them up to hopefully, like, I notice, you know, the little bit of bends and cracking in the paper towards the top here. I'm trying to point out like the most obvious ones I see, but it's really no different than the first one. I heard that putting vellum between your cardstock and the paper leads to better results. And what I liked about the vellum technique is, this was from the Cow Whispers Creative Cards on YouTube. It'll be linked. She actually was able to use the same piece of vellum over and over again. So rather than always having to come up with a piece of vellum, she just left a piece of vellum in her embossing folder and then used that continuously. Now, I have a brand new sheet. It hasn't been embossed yet. And so I want to make these both as fair and even as possible so that I'm not getting different results. So I'm going to emboss this, and then I'm going to add the cardstock to each one underneath it. Right, so I have the ones that I embossed with the vellum. And again, since there was such minimal cracking, I looked at this one very, very carefully, and actually there is still a little bit of cracking. And now let's try the white core. So what I will say is this one, I do notice a reduction in the amount of cracking. Is it free from cracking? Definitely not. Definitely some cracking here, here, etc. But compared to the one where I did nothing and the amount of cracking that's on there, it's a definite improvement. So I would recommend trying the vellum because maybe you will have even more success in your situation. Again, it is a slightly less deep embossing, in part because I think it's trying to, you know, emboss through the vellum as well. And maybe that's why there's less cracking, is because it's less deeply embossed, so there's less pressure on the cardstock. Not sure. I want to test computer paper. Let's test that one next. So I will move. Again, I've heard many people say that this is a great technique, but I'll take the piece of cardstock and I'll just wrap it in a sandwich of computer paper, and I'll run it through my machine, and I'll do the same thing with the white core. This is recycled printer paper, so it's definitely on the thin side. There are different thicknesses of even computer printer paper, so I just want to be clear about that. And it did seem to reduce the overall amount of cracking, as minimal as it ever was on this one. But I'm interested to see the white core because I think that's where it really highlights if it's making any difference at all. And compared to the original, there is actually almost no cracking. There's a little bit here, 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 up a little there. It's much, much, much better than the original. You can see all the white areas on that one, and quite a bit of an improvement. I do think it's worth comparing vellum to computer paper, and I do think that the computer paper did even a little bit better than the vellum. So it does kind of seem like basically just putting something between the cardstock and the embossing folder helps with cracking. Then the last thing I want to try is the misting. This is the one where I am the most hesitant on, because what I have noticed personally in the past, having tried this, is that the mist often causes water spots and damages the cardstock because it's water. And I know that the idea is, well, if it's a fine enough mist, it won't do that. But getting that fine enough mist is where I'm having trouble. And I have seen people use this distress sprayer, and that's what I'm going to use. And I'll make sure that it's on its thin, like it's on its spritz mode, as opposed to, because there's a secondary mode where it limits it and makes bigger droplets so that you can work with distressing. So you want to make sure it's on its mist mode, and you want to use a really fine mist is the idea. that's on its mist mode. I've given it a few pumps to make sure like there's no, I don't even know, like residual drops left. I just want to give it like the best try I can. And I did notice if I spray from further away, that's better. So you're probably not, like, I don't want to spray this close because then it's going to get too wet. We're trying to get a really fine mist, like barely touching. And as you can see, I'm getting drops. So it might just be my particular bottle, like it maybe got damaged over time. But this is like, that's why this technique scares me, because I feel like if you don't have the perfect mist, it basically just doesn't work. So I think I would rather try the computer paper method if that gives similar results. So I'm gonna, while this is still wet, I don't want it to dry too much, I'm gonna get it through my machine. So the one that I misted, again, this one, not a lot of cracking to begin with, but I do think it actually did improve the cracking a little bit. It's not noticeable, but what I will say is I do think that the misted cardstock did give not only at least as good of an impression, but actually maybe a deeper impression. So if what you are looking for is a, you know, more clear, deep impression, you're not getting the pressure that you want, or like adding more pressure is causing more cracking, you know, this misting method might be worth it. It's a little finicky for me personally. And that, again, that's just what I personally would prefer to use the computer paper, because it gives a consistent result and I don't have to worry, am I misting it correctly? Because we just put it between paper. But, you know, it gives that deeper impression, whereas the paper maybe took away from the impression a little bit. And then we'll take a look at the white core. So this is the no modifications. And then here is the misted. It's a little better, but there's still quite a bit of cracking. You can see almost every heart has some amount of cracking, less so towards the edges, and that might be the way that my machine puts pressure on things. I'm not really sure, but if I took a look at the mist versus the computer paper, you can see all that white that's on the misted card that is not on the computer paper card. Okay, so I have tried 4 different methods that have been suggested to reduce cracking with cardstock, and I tried 2 different cardstocks so that, you know, get a better variety. And for me, computer paper is the clear winner. It gave me the like really easy, consistent results in terms of like you just had to wrap the paper around. There was nothing difficult about doing it. I will say, like, rolling the cardstock, it did almost nothing, but also it risks you putting a bend in the cardstock. Because I thought maybe I'll combine methods. Like maybe if rolling the cardstock helped a little bit, I would do rolling the cardstock and misting, or rolling the cardstock and then doing the pattern, the computer paper, for instance. But because rolling the cardstock runs the risk of putting a crease in your paper, and then doesn't even really help much from my observation, I don't think I would do that. I think that I would just put it through the computer paper, and that would be my personal go-to method. I think it also protects your embossing folder. So if you're embossing an odd material, which I have been known to do because I scratched my embossing folder embossing sandpaper, I know that's a bit of a weird thing to do, but I was just trying different interesting materials to emboss, and you can check out those videos. I'll actually leave you a link in the video description. I've tried out many different materials with embossing folders to get just kind of see like what are some fun things you can do with embossing folder. You don't only have to emboss cardstock. And if you found this video helpful, here's another video where you can find more ideas for enjoying your crafting time and supplies. Let me know you like this video with a share to your crafty community. Subscribe and click the bell so you don't miss the next template or tutorial, and check the video description for product links. See you in the next video.